My family held a fake funeral for my sister who was still secretly alive. So when I discovered the letters that exposed everything, they broke into my house at 3 a.m. and made me understand why some secrets should stay buried. I was at my grandmother's funeral when everything started feeling wrong. My parents kept whispering to each other during the will reading, and when the lawyer announced I'd inherited grandma's house, their faces went completely white. My mom grabbed my arm so hard it hurt and said we needed to talk about selling immediately. That night they showed up at the house while I was packing up grandma's things, and my dad kept insisting on checking the attic himself, which was weird because he never helped with anything. After they left, I found this loose floorboard in grandma's closet, and underneath was an envelope with my name on it that said, "The truth about Julia." My hands were shaking because Julia was my sister who died in foster care when I was 10 years old. Inside were 12 letters from Julia to my grandmother spanning 8 years, and a recent photo of her very much alive at 23 years old. The first letter started with, "I know they told everyone I died, but I'm 18 now, and I need you to know I'm okay." I called my parents immediately, and after this long silence, my dad just said to come to the house alone right away. When I got there, they admitted Julia was alive, but kept saying she was dangerous and manipulative, and that they'd protected me from her. My mom was crying and saying Julia destroys everything she touches. I spent the next few days going through everything and found a retired caseworker's business card and grandma's papers. When I met with her, she told me Julia had been removed from our home after my father broke her arm, and my parents surrendered custody rather than face an investigation. According to Julia's letters, the real story was that Julia had discovered my father was stealing money from his elderly mother, and when she threatened to tell, the accident happened. I reached out to Julia through a return address on one of the letters, and we had this emotional phone call where she told me she thought our whole family had abandoned her, and that she tried to contact me when she turned 18, but our parents threatened her with harassment charges. My grandmother had been caught between losing both granddaughters or just one, so she secretly supported Julia while maintaining access to me. Her journal entries showed how guilty she felt about the impossible choice. When I finally met Julia at a restaurant, she kept touching my hand, like she was checking I was real. She told me about her life and showed me photos on her phone of her husband who's a mechanic and their 1-year-old daughter. At the end, she said she'd love for me to meet them someday when I was ready. I told my cousins and aunts that Julia was alive, and the family group chat completely exploded with people demanding to know what I meant by she's alive. My aunt said we had a memorial service and cried for her and asked what kind of sick lie it was. My uncle said he knew something was off when there was no body to bury. My parents went into damage control mode and started telling everyone I was having a breakdown from grief. My dad emptied our joint savings account with my college tuition and told me it would be returned once I stopped looking into Julia. Then they tried to get me fired by calling my boss about my mental instability. My mom called me at 2 in the morning whispering to stop this before it goes too far, then denied calling me the next day. During all this, I started noticing weird things about Julia's stories that didn't quite add up. I found receipts in grandma's records showing much larger payments in recent years than what Julia had mentioned. When I called the place Julia said she worked at, they said they never heard of her. I confronted Julia about the inconsistencies, and she completely broke down. She admitted she'd been meeting with our father several times over the years, and that there was no husband or child because those photos were from a friend's family. My father had been paying her to stay away and maintain the lie that she was dead. She said after so long, the lie became easier than the truth and she needed the money. I realized everyone had been lying, including my parents, Julia, and maybe even my grandmother. As I sat alone in grandma's house looking at those letters, I couldn't help but wonder what else they were all hiding and why my grandmother really wanted me to find those letters in the first place. Was this whole thing orchestrated? And if so, for what purpose? I'm still searching for answers, and the more I dig, the less I understand about my own family. The next morning, I woke up to 37 missed calls from my mom. She left voicemails begging me to call her back and saying we needed to talk about Julia immediately. Her voice sounded desperate, almost hysterical. I ignored them and drove to the address Julia had given me during our meeting. It was this rundown apartment complex on the edge of town with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. I knocked on her door for like 10 minutes before she finally answered. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her hair was matted. Her apartment was basically empty except for a mattress on the floor and some clothes in garbage bags. The walls were bare and stained, and there was a musty smell that made me want to leave immediately. I asked her what was really going on, and she just started crying. She told me she'd been staying at different places for years and couldn't hold down a job. I noticed her hands were shaking really bad. She kept apologizing and saying she never meant for things to get this complicated. I asked her straight up if she needed help, and she said no, but her eyes said yes. I left feeling more confused than ever. When I got back to grandma's house, my parents were waiting in the driveway. My dad looked angrier than I'd ever seen him, his face red and jaw clenched. He demanded I give him all the letters and anything else I'd found. I told him no and tried to go inside, but he blocked the door with his body. My mom was begging me to just listen for 5 minutes. They followed me inside, and my dad started going through drawers and cabinets like a man possessed. I threatened to call the police, and he laughed, a harsh sound that didn't reach his eyes. He said I had no idea what I was dealing with. My mom finally got him to sit down, and she told me Julia had serious problems that started when she was 12. She said Julia would steal things and lie constantly and hurt herself for attention. Her voice was steady now, like she'd rehearsed this speech. I didn't know what to believe anymore. They left after making me promise to stay away from Julia for my own safety. That night I couldn't sleep, so I went through more of grandma's stuff. I found a box of old photos hidden behind some books in her study. There were pictures of Julia and me as kids that I'd never seen before. In most of them, Julia looked happy and normal, her smile bright and genuine, but in the later ones, she looked different, like something was wrong. Her eyes seemed vacant and her smile forced. I found one photo where she had bandages on her arms. On the back, grandma had written, Julia, age 13, third attempt. I felt sick to my stomach. I started putting pieces together and realized my parents might not be the villains I thought they were. The next day, Julia called me crying and said she needed $2,000 for rent or she'd be evicted. Her voice was high and panicked. I told her I didn't have that kind of money and she got angry. She said I inherited a whole house and couldn't help my own sister. She hung up on me when I suggested she come stay with me instead. An hour later, she called back apologizing and saying she was just stressed. This pattern continued for days. She'd call asking for money. I'd say no. She'd get upset, then call back acting like nothing happened. I started screening her calls, watching my phone light up with her number over and over. My cousin Tyler reached out and said he remembered when Julia lived with them briefly before she died. He said she set their garage on fire and blamed it on their dog. He also said she convinced their younger sister to run away with her, and they found them 3 days later at a bus station 2 states away. I didn't want to believe him, but the details were too specific to be lies. Other family members started sharing similar stories once they realized Julia was alive. My Aunt Beverly said Julia had stolen her credit cards when she was 14 and racked up thousands in debt. My Uncle Roger said she'd broken into his house multiple times after she was placed in foster care, taking small things like family photos and jewelry. I decided to do my own research and found Julia's old social media accounts. She'd been using different names, but the photos were definitely her. The posts were concerning. Lots of talk about people betraying her and how everyone was against her. There were gaps in posting that lined up with what I now suspected were treatment stays or hospitalizations. In one post from 2 years ago, she mentioned being clean for 6 months. Clean from what? I wondered. The more I dug, the more I realized how little I actually knew my sister. The girl in those childhood photos seemed like a stranger now, and I wondered if I'd ever really known her at all. I confronted my parents about what I'd found. They came over to grandma's house and we sat in the living room where just weeks ago we'd gathered after the funeral. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains grandma had hung decades ago, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floor. My dad looked exhausted, the anger from before replaced with something like defeat. Deep lines creased his forehead and his shoulders slumped forward as if carrying an invisible weight. My mom kept twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit I'd noticed more frequently in recent years. They told me Julia's problems started after a bad fall when she was 11. She'd hit her head pretty hard on the concrete steps outside grandma's back door, and after that she was different, more aggressive, more impulsive. The doctor said the frontal lobe damage might have affected her impulse control, but they couldn't be sure. The stealing started small, lunch money from classmates, then escalated. By 13, she was shoplifting makeup and electronics and selling the stuff to other kids. They tried therapy, but Julia would lie to the therapists or refuse to go. She'd sit in silence for entire sessions, staring at the wall with her arms crossed. The arm incident happened when she was 15. My dad swore it was an accident, that Julia had been destroying my grandmother's living room, throwing books and smashing picture frames, and when he tried to stop her, she fell wrong. His voice cracked when he said it. The memory clearly haunted him still. But child services didn't care about the context. Julia told them he did it on purpose, and that was enough. My mom explained they could have fought it, but Julia was already on probation for theft and assault. She'd attacked a teacher who caught her cheating on a chemistry exam, leaving scratches down the woman's face. If they went to court, everything would come out and Julia would end up in juvenile detention. The lawyer said it could be years before she got out, so they made a deal. They'd surrender custody if Julia got treatment instead of jail time. It seemed like the best option for everyone. The social workers promised Julia would get help, that there were programs designed for troubled teens. But Julia never forgave them for giving up on her. She ran away from every placement, every group home. She'd show up at our house in the middle of the night, sometimes hammered or high, breaking windows to get in. I vaguely remembered waking up to police lights flashing through my bedroom curtains, but my parents always said it was the neighbors having problems. They got a restraining order when I was 9. Julia violated it 3 times. The last time she brought a knife, standing in our driveway screaming that we'd stolen her life. That's when my parents told everyone she died. They moved us to a new school district 40 miles away and started over. My mom was crying again as she told me this, mascara running down her cheeks in thin black streams. I asked why Grandma kept in contact with her if she was so dangerous. My dad said Grandma always believed Julia would get better. She paid for private treatment centers in different states, expensive therapists who specialized in trauma, medications that cost hundreds per month. Nothing worked for long. Julia would improve for a few months, send hopeful letters about her progress, then spiral again when something triggered her. The cycle never ended, but Grandma never gave up hope. Even when Julia stole her jewelry and pawned it, even when she destroyed property during her rages, Grandma kept trying. She'd say Julia just needed someone to believe in her. My parents said they tried to warn Grandma, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced love could fix Julia. Maybe it was guilt over the fall happening at her house during a family barbecue. Maybe it was just a grandmother's blind love. Either way, she enabled Julia for years, inadvertently funding her addiction and preventing her from hitting rock bottom. After they left, I sat with this information for hours. The house felt different now, heavy with secrets. Every room held memories I'd never known about. Part of me wanted to believe they were exaggerating, but the evidence was mounting. I called the retired caseworker again and asked for more details. She sighed deeply before speaking, as if the weight of old cases still pressed on her conscience. She confirmed Julia had a history of behavioral issues before the removal. She said my parents had actually tried to get Julia help multiple times, but the system failed them. They'd been on waiting lists for specialized programs, denied insurance coverage for residential treatment, told their daughter's problems weren't severe enough until they became too severe to manage. She seemed sad when she said sometimes there are no good answers. Some kids just struggle and hurt everyone around them despite everyone's best efforts. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it rang true. The world wasn't divided into villains and victims as cleanly as I'd hoped. Julia started calling me nonstop after that. Dozens of calls a day, my phone buzzing constantly like an angry insect. The voicemails got increasingly frantic. She said our parents were poisoning me against her. She said they were liars who abandoned their own daughter when she needed them most. She said I was her only family left and I was betraying her just like everyone else. Her voice would shift from pleading to furious within the same message. Then the texts started, hundreds of them. Some were angry, calling me names I won't repeat, wishing horrible things would happen to me. Others were desperate, begging me to believe her, saying she'd die without me. She sent photos of herself crying, her face gaunt and hollow-eyed. She sent screenshots of old family photos from before I was born, asking if I remembered being happy together. Photos I'd never seen before. Julia pushing me on a swing, Julia helping me blow out birthday candles, Julia reading to me in bed. It was manipulation, but it still hurt. Those moments had been real once. I had to block her number eventually, my hands shaking as I did it. 2 days later, she showed up at Grandma's house. I heard pounding on the door at 3 in the morning, violent and rhythmic like a heartbeat. She was screaming my name and crying, her voice raw and desperate. I crept to the front door in my pajamas, my heart racing. I looked through the peephole and she looked bad, really bad, thin to the point of skeletal, shaking violently, clearly high on something. Her hair was matted and greasy, her clothes filthy. She looked nothing like the little girl in those photos. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I stood there frozen, watching her pound and scream until her voice went hoarse. I called my parents and my dad came over, breaking several traffic laws to get there. Julia was gone by the time he arrived, but she'd broken a window trying to get in. We found blood on the glass, dark and already drying. My dad helped me board it up with plywood from the garage and stayed the rest of the night on the couch. Neither of us slept. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and not talking about what had just happened. The next morning I found Julia had created fake social media accounts to message me. The usernames were variations of my name or references to our childhood. The messages were all over the place, stream of consciousness rambles that jumped between topics. One minute she loved me and missed me desperately. The next she hated me for abandoning her. She accused me of stealing her inheritance, said Grandma had promised her the house years ago. She said Grandma's house should have been hers since she'd suffered more, lost more. She threatened to burn it down if I didn't give her money. She sent long messages detailing all the ways our parents had failed her, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep in strange beds. I screenshot everything and wondered if I should call the police, but she was still my sister. Some part of me remembered the little girl who used to braid my hair with gentle fingers and read me stories in funny voices. I couldn't reconcile that memory with this person who seemed intent on destroying everything she touched. My cousin Olivia reached out and said Julia had contacted her too. Julia told her I was holding her hostage in Grandma's house and needed help. She sent Olivia photos of the boarded window claiming I'd locked her out of her own home. Olivia didn't believe it but wanted to warn me. Apparently Julia was telling different stories to different family members, trying to turn them against each other. She'd always been smart, and now she was using that intelligence to manipulate. My Aunt Catherine called and said Julia showed up at her work claiming to be homeless because of me. She made a scene in the reception area, crying and begging for help until the security guard had to escort her out. My Uncle Jesse said she'd been leaving voicemails saying our parents murdered her and faked her death to steal her inheritance. The lies were getting more elaborate and desperate. She was creating her own reality and trying to force others to live in it. I decided to go through Grandma's financial records more carefully. I spread them out on the dining room table where Grandma used to serve Sunday dinners. What I found made my stomach drop. The payments to Julia weren't just living expenses. There were rehab centers with names like New Horizons and Second Chances, psychiatric hospitals across 3 states, medication costs that would bankrupt most families, thousands and thousands over the years. Recent receipts showed Grandma had paid for Julia's stay at an addiction treatment facility just 6 months ago, a place that cost more than most people's annual salary. The same facility Julia checked herself out of after 2 weeks, claiming the staff was abusive. There were court fees too. Julia had been arrested multiple times for theft, assault, substance possession, vandalism. Grandma had bailed her out every time, paid for lawyers who got charges reduced, paid restitution to victims who'd had their property destroyed or stolen. The numbers were staggering. Grandma had spent her entire retirement savings trying to save Julia. I found a letter from Grandma to Julia dated just a month before she died. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, as if her hands trembled while writing it. In it, Grandma said she loved Julia but couldn't keep enabling her. She said the money was running out and Julia needed to take responsibility for her life. She offered to pay for one more treatment program if Julia completed the full 90 days. Otherwise, the financial support would stop. She wrote about her own failing health, how she needed to preserve what was left for her own care. The letter was returned unopened, refused, written across it in red ink. Julia never read it, or maybe she did and sent it back as a message. Either way, Grandma died thinking she'd failed her granddaughter. The guilt must have been crushing. I found her journal from those final weeks, full of prayers for Julia and regrets about things she could have done differently. My mom called and asked if I was okay. Her voice was gentle, motherly in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. The anger between us had dissolved, replaced by shared worry. I broke down and told her everything. The broken window, the threats, the fear that kept me awake at night. She listened without judgment. She said they'd been monitoring Julia for years through various sources, trying to protect me without scaring me. They knew about the substances, meth, and her, and mostly the arrests in multiple counties, the psychiatric hospitalizations that never lasted long enough to help. They'd hoped Julia would get better, and they could reunite us when we were both adults, but she never did. And now I was in danger because I'd opened this door. My mom apologized for not telling me sooner. She said they'd wanted me to have a normal life, to go to college and build a career without the shadow of Julia's illness hanging over me. I understood, but it still hurt. All those years of thinking I was an only child when my sister was out there, suffering and alone. That night, Julia broke into Grandma's house while I was sleeping. I double-checked all the locks before bed, even pushed a chair against the back door, but she found a way in through a basement window I'd forgotten about. I woke up to her standing over my bed, silhouetted against the hallway light. She looked skeletal in the moonlight, her eyes wild and unfocused, pupils dilated to black pools. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. She said she just wanted to talk. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking, fingers twitching in repetitive motions. I tried to stay calm too, remembering what I'd read about de-escalating situations with unstable people. I asked her to go to the living room and I'd make us tea. She agreed, but followed me to the kitchen instead, staying close enough that I could smell the sour odor of unwashed clothes and something chemical. She kept saying I was all she had left. She said our parents had ruined her life, and now I was her only chance at a family. I noticed she kept touching her pocket. I wondered if she had a weapon. My mind raced through possibilities. Knife, GN, syringe. I made the tea with shaking hands while she talked. The familiar ritual of filling the kettle and choosing mugs helped ground me. She told me about the foster homes where older kids stole her belongings, the group homes with bars on the windows, the treatment centers that felt like prisons, how they drugged her until she couldn't think straight and restrained her when she tried to resist, how our parents never visited, never called, never sent letters, how she spent birthdays and holidays alone watching other kids get picked up by families. She showed me scars on her wrists from sewer slide attempts no one had noticed until too late. Part of me felt sympathy, but I was also terrified. She wasn't stable. Her mood kept shifting like clouds across the sun. One second she was crying about missing me. The next she was raging about the inheritance, accusing me of conspiring with our parents to steal what was rightfully hers. I kept my phone in my hand under the counter. 911 already dialed and ready to call. She noticed and got angry. Her face transformed, twisting into something ugly and unfamiliar. She accused me of texting our parents, of setting her up. She grabbed for my phone and I pulled back. We struggled and the tea spilled everywhere. The hot water burned my arm and I cried out, pain shooting up to my shoulder. She apologized immediately, trying to help, reaching for dish towels to clean the mess, but I backed away. I told her she needed to leave. She started crying and begging, falling to her knees on the wet floor. She said she had nowhere to go. No money, no friends, no family, just me. She said she'd been sleeping under bridges and in abandoned buildings. She showed me infected track marks on her arms. I felt guilty but held firm. I told her I'd help her get treatment, but she had to leave now. She laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking glass. She said treatment didn't work. Nothing worked. She was broken and everyone knew it. The system had given up on her, and now I was too. I managed to convince her to leave by promising to meet her the next day with money. I hated lying, but I needed her out before things escalated further. I said I'd bring $5,000 to the park where we used to play as children. Her eyes lit up with desperate hope. After she left through the front door, I called the police and filed a report. The officer who came sounded tired and unsurprised. They said without evidence of a crime, they couldn't do much. The broken window from before wasn't enough since I hadn't seen her do it. I'd have to wait for her to do something worse. I couldn't believe that was my only option. Wait for my sister to hurt me or herself badly enough for the law to intervene. I changed the locks the next morning and installed security cameras that covered every entrance. My dad helped without saying he told me so. I appreciated that. He worked in silence, his face grim with the knowledge that we were preparing for war with his own daughter. Julia figured out I'd lied pretty quickly. The calls and texts started again, but now they were all threats. She said she'd tell everyone what our father did to Grandma, implying dark secrets that didn't exist. She said she'd ruin his business and our family's reputation. She sent photos of herself with bruises and said she'd blame them on me, claim I'd attacked her when she came to visit. She knew exactly what to say to terrify me. She was spiraling hard, and I didn't know how to stop it. I considered getting my own restraining order, but worried it would push her over the edge. I was trapped between wanting to help my sister and protecting myself. Every decision felt wrong. My parents hired a private investigator to find out where Julia was staying. He was a former cop who specialized in missing persons and family cases. Turns out she'd been couch surfing with substance dealers and other addicts in a part of town I'd never visited. She'd been telling people I was her rich sister who abandoned her after stealing her inheritance. Some of them believed her and were angry on her behalf. The investigator showed us photos of Julia with these people, rough-looking men and women with hard eyes and facial tattoos. He warned us to be careful. He said Julia was unstable and surrounded by dangerous people who might do anything for money. He recommended we leave town for a while, but I refused. I wasn't letting her chase me from Grandma's house. It was mine now, and I was staying. This was my stand. A week passed with no contact from Julia. I started to relax, thinking maybe she'd moved on or gotten arrested somewhere. I went back to work and tried to pretend everything was normal. Then I came home to find my car vandalized. The windows were smashed and someone had spray-painted liar on the hood in red paint that looked like blood in the fading light. Glass covered the driveway like deadly diamonds. The security cameras showed a figure in a hoodie, but the face wasn't visible. I knew it was her though, or someone she'd sent. The way they moved, the height and build, it had to be Julia. I filed another police report, but again they said without proof it was her specifically, they couldn't do anything. The system was failing me just like it had failed my parents years ago. I understood now why they'd chosen to pretend she was dead. Sometimes the living could haunt you worse than any ghost. My boss called the next morning and said someone had been calling the office claiming I was embezzling money. They'd sent emails with fake evidence, doctored bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts. My boss didn't believe it but warned me to handle whatever was going on. She said it was affecting team morale and client confidence. I knew Julia was behind it. She was trying to destroy my life like she'd threatened, attacking the stability I'd worked so hard to build. I had to take time off work to deal with everything. My coworkers were understanding, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Drama follows some people, and now I was one of them. I was becoming someone people whispered about in break rooms, someone whose personal life overshadowed their professional contributions. Everything I'd built over years was crumbling because of a sister I'd never known I had. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. My dad installed motion sensor lights around the house that turned the yard into a prison searchlight every time a cat walked by. I jumped at every noise, checked the locks obsessively, kept all the curtains drawn. This wasn't living anymore. I was a prisoner in Grandma's house while Julia was out there planning her next move. Then I got a call from my cousin Tyler. He said Julia had shown up at his work asking for money, claiming I'd stolen everything from her. When he refused, she'd caused a scene in the parking lot, screaming and throwing rocks at cars until security removed her. She told everyone there that our whole family had conspired against her. Tyler's boss was understanding, but warned him to handle his family issues. Now she was affecting other people's jobs too. The damage was spreading like a virus through our family. I decided to try one more time to help her. I contacted a social worker who specialized in dual diagnosis cases. She agreed to meet with me and review Julia's history. After looking at everything she said, Julia needed long-term residential treatment, but would have to want it herself. She gave me pamphlets for state-funded programs that might accept her. The waiting lists were months long, but it was something. I held on to those pamphlets like life preservers, hoping I'd get a chance to give them to Julia when she was ready. 3 days later, Julia broke into the house again. This time I was ready. The motion sensors went off and I grabbed the bat and my phone. I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911 while she pounded on the door. She was screaming that I'd ruined her life, that I'd turned everyone against her. The door shook with each hit. I could hear her throwing things, glass breaking, furniture crashing. The police took 12 minutes to arrive. 12 minutes of pure terror while my sister destroyed Grandma's living room. They arrested her this time. She had meth in her pocket and a knife. She fought them, kicking and spitting, screaming that I was the criminal. I watched from the window as they put her in the patrol car. She looked small in the back seat, defeated. Part of me wanted to run out and tell them to let her go, but I didn't. I couldn't keep enabling her like Grandma had. The cycle had to stop. My parents came over to help clean up the mess. We worked in silence mostly, sweeping glass, uprighting furniture, trying to put Grandma's house back together. My mom found a photo album Julia Julia had torn apart. Pictures of our childhood scattered across the floor like dead leaves. She started crying as she picked them up. My dad held her while she sobbed about where they went wrong. I didn't have answers for them. Sometimes there aren't any. Julia got 90 days in county jail. The public defender called and asked if I'd write a letter supporting treatment instead of more jail time. I spent hours on that letter trying to balance honesty with compassion. I wrote about the sister I remembered and the one I'd recently met. I asked the judge to consider mandatory treatment, something with structure and time to actually work. I didn't know if it would help, but I had to try. During those 90 days, I fixed up Grandma's house, replaced the broken windows, patched the holes in the walls, painted over the damage. I found more of Julia's things hidden in strange places. Old diary pages stuffed behind picture frames, photos tucked inside books, evidence of a life lived in shadows. I saved it all in a box, hoping someday she'd want it back, hoping someday she'd be well enough to look at it without rage. My Aunt Beverly helped me go through Grandma's remaining belongings. We found letters Grandma had written but never sent, all addressed to Julia. They were full of love and worry, advice and encouragement. Grandma had never given up hope. Even when Julia stole from her, even when she destroyed property, even when she said terrible things, Grandma kept writing those letters. We cried reading them together. I started seeing a therapist to deal with everything. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Julia's choices, that mental illness and addiction were diseases that destroyed families, that sometimes love wasn't enough. It was hard to accept, but necessary. I'd been carrying guilt about having a normal childhood while Julia suffered. The therapist helped me see that survivor's guilt wouldn't help anyone. The investigator my parents hired found out Julia had been telling people I was holding money that belonged to her. She convinced a few addicts that if they helped her get it, she'd share. He warned us to be extra careful when she got out. These people were desperate and believed Julia's lies. I thought about selling Grandma's house and moving somewhere Julia couldn't find me, but that felt like letting her win. 2 weeks before Julia's release, my mom called with news. Julia had agreed to go to a 90-day treatment program after jail. The judge had made it a condition of her probation. It was the same program Grandma had tried to get her into before she died. My mom sounded hopeful but cautious. We'd been here before. Julia was good at saying what people wanted to hear. I wrote Julia a letter and sent it to the jail. I told her I loved her and wanted her to get better. I said I'd support her recovery but had boundaries now. No money, no living with me, no contact until she completed treatment. I said Grandma would want her to get well, and I'd save her things for when she was ready. I didn't know if she'd read it, but I needed to say it. She called me the day before her release. Her voice sounded different, clear. She apologized for everything and said jail had been a wake-up call. She talked about the treatment program and how she was ready to change. She sounded sincere, but I'd learned not to trust words anymore. Actions were what mattered. She asked if I'd visit her in treatment after 30 days. I said maybe, if her counselor thought it was a good idea. My parents drove her to the treatment center directly from jail. They said she seemed calm, even grateful. She hugged them both and cried, saying she was sorry for all the pain she'd caused. My mom called me sobbing with relief. My dad sounded cautiously optimistic. We all wanted to believe this time would be different, but we learned to hope quietly, without expectations. I used those 90 days to rebuild my life. Went back to work full-time, reconnected with friends I'd been avoiding, started dating again. I painted Grandma's kitchen yellow like she'd always talked about doing. I planted a garden in the backyard, something beautiful growing where chaos had been. The house felt lighter somehow, like it was healing too. Julia's counselor called after 30 days. She said Julia was doing well, participating in groups, taking her medication consistently. She thought a visit might be helpful. I drove 3 hours to the treatment center, my hands shaking the whole way. Julia looked healthier than I'd seen her since finding those letters. She'd gained weight, her eyes were clear, her hands steady. We sat in the visiting room and talked for an hour. She showed me artwork she'd done in therapy, pictures of bridges and doors and other symbols of transition. She didn't ask for money or make demands. She just wanted to know about my life. I visited twice more before her discharge. Each time she seemed stronger, more like the sister in those old photos. She talked about her plans, a sober living house, a part-time job, continued therapy. She'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder on top of the addiction. The medications were helping. She said she finally understood why she'd felt crazy her whole life. There was a reason, and it wasn't her fault. The day she got out, I was terrified she'd show up at the house. But she didn't. She went to the sober living house like planned. She called to let me know she was okay and said she was respecting my boundaries. I cried after that call. Happy tears for once. Maybe this time really would be different.